So I think the threat has stretched from the very low speed to a hypersonic speed, from a very low altitude to the highest level, even out of the atmosphere. So today, the battlefield is more complicated than ever.
The guillotine sharpens the mind. When there is a threat, when there's an imminent threat, and when you see these masses of just ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, UAVs, drones coming at you, that sharpens the mind, and that behooves nations to act and immediately find solutions.
Welcome to another episode of Design for Advantage, our ongoing podcast series with RAFAEL, where we dig into the systems and strategies shaping the modern battlefield. In previous episodes, we've covered everything from precision strike and loitering munitions to laser weapons and active protection. But today we're turning our attention skyward because air defense has never been more important. In a world of drone swarms, cruise missiles, hypersonics, and even homemade rockets, defending airspace isn't just about having the right kit. It's about speed, coordination, and staying one step ahead. But what does that actually look like in practice? And what are the lessons from those facing these threats every day? I'm Tony Skinner, Creative Director at Shephard Group, and joining me are two people who have lived and shaped this reality: retired Brigadier General Shahar Shohat, former commander of Israel's Air Defense Forces, and Gideon Weiss, RAFAEL's VP of Business Development and Marketing. Gentlemen, great to have you with us on the podcast.
Welcome. Hello.
Hello.
So let's begin with the bigger picture. Brigadier General Shohat, over the last 2 decades, aerial threats have significantly evolved. Air defense commanders now have to deal with everything from aircraft, rockets, drones, cruise missiles, and I guess now even hypersonics. From your experience, from being one of those air defense commanders, how has the landscape changed? How has that altered air defense doctrine?
I think we can mention a few revolution, if I may say so, in the modern air defense era. Started from the aircraft and the helicopters, a manned platform, into the unmanned platform like UAV and UAS. And then came the tactical ballistic missile and the rocket and the mortars. And lately we see the drone revolution. So I think the threat has stretched from the very low speed to a hypersonic speed, from a very low altitude to the highest level, even out of the atmosphere. So today the battlefield is more complicated than ever. Having said that, no other threats, past threats like the aircraft, they are still relevant. So you have to deal with the entire threats together simultaneously, and that made the battlefield much more complicated than ever.
And then, Gideon, just to bring you in, I know that you're having these conversations with partners around the world. Are they also seeing these shifts, and is that changing the priorities and the kind of conversations that you're having?
Most certainly. I think that one of the lessons learned that we see around the world is that everyone is looking at the lessons learned from the European, the Mediterranean, Middle East conflicts, and the air defenses concepts have changed. There have certainly been some very pressing operational needs that have influenced this. So nations are facing similar threats and responding differently depending on their geography and what they have. But it's clear that architecture matters. It's clear that there's no silver bullet, right? We say that there are several systems that need to work together. So they are looking at integrating with open architecture. That we'll talk about that later maybe. But the number one lesson learned is that really that nations need to look at stockpiles. That's probably the number one lesson learned from the recent 2 years in whatever landscape that you're looking at, if you don't have the stockpiles to be able to protect of interceptors, to protect your skies, then that becomes a problem. And I think a lot of nations are looking at similar threats, but are looking at different types of solutions because not everyone has their own availability of stockpiles and technologies at their disposal.
And Brigadier General Shahat's Gideon mentioned the fact that there's no silver bullets here. And I guess looking from afar, it's often Iron Dome that sort of grabs the headlines. But equally, I understand that, there's no kind of one size fits all solution, and it's kind of a multi-layered defense, approach. I guess why is that approach so essential?
So I think one of the basic element of air defense is a mix of system and mass of ammunition and capability. That multi-layer approach and multi-system approach give you the redundancy that you need in order to mitigate the challenge that I just mentioned in my early beginning or opening remarks. So, and of course, there is the economical issue that you don't want to waste ammunition and, of course, money, and use high-end technology and very expensive munition in order to mitigate a challenge that is very simple and stupid. So there is a kind of balance between the economic part of the battlefield and the capabilities. And I think today, as we saw the mass of in quantity of the threats, the capability to work with the salvos and swords, so you need to adapt different solution to different threats to make sure that you have the best chances to intercept the threats. And when I'm talking about threats today, it's not only about the platform itself, it's also about the munition that you need to deal with, because the capability today is totally different.
And then, Gideon, I mean, that multi-layered defense makes a huge amount of sense, but there's obviously a huge amount of complexity involved in that. From an industry perspective, how do you design around that? And I guess, earlier you touched on the role of stockpiles and open systems architecture, but could you sort of perhaps go into a little bit more detail around, how you can kind of help partners navigate that complexity?
Certainly, I think that both on what is already applied and what nations are looking into, it is clear that because there is no silver bullet, I mean, you can look at some systems that are performing explicitly well, and of course the Iron Dome is probably the best example in the world. Thousands and thousands of very successful interceptions at phenomenal rates of way above 90% success rate of interception, which is just unheard of, especially in these numbers. But even that on its own is not sufficient for the very, very long range and the very sophisticated ranges, but also against drones. You want to be able to protect at the same time from hypersonic ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, rockets that come in salvos, but also against swarms of just drones and UAVs. And you don't want to waste these precious interceptors against these small capabilities. So the multi-layered defense needs to take into account whatever every nation can put together, whether it is these different types of interceptors that they can buy from different nations or from their own, or if it's the combination of those with lasers or electronic warfare, etc. So the open architecture and the partnerships matter a lot, both on the operational side in terms of the ability to integrate those systems together. Once you have open architecture, you can take systems from different nations and put them together to work in your ecosystem, but also in the industrial side to work together for the sake of the technical side of the open architecture and the production of these interceptors. So that is the aspect on the industry side that nations are looking into, how to produce in mass and how to do this economically, in the sense that it will not just be a buy, it would be localized and sovereign.
And then I guess I want to address the next question to each of you, or to both of you. And we have talked about operational lessons a little bit, but if we consider how fast the threat landscape is evolving, what other sort of big operational lessons are you taking away from kind of recent current conflicts? What's worked, what needs to change, what's sort of been underestimated?
Maybe I'll try to take that and open it up for Brigadier General Shohat. I think there's one thing that we all agree upon is that the guillotine sharpens the mind. When there is a threat, when there's an imminent threat, and when you see these masses of just ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, UAVs, drones coming at you, that sharpens the mind, and that behooves nations to act and immediately find solutions. So all of what we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years, but more recently in the last 2 years, has accelerated pace in everything that nations are doing, not only what we do at home. So it is not only about what we do in our architectures and our build and our infrastructure to manufacture, but also in how the doctrines of combination of defense and offense. Then what do you do? Is it only defending against those incoming threats, or can you apply long-range precision strike to be able to counter that? And I think I'd like Brigadier General Shohat to kind of say how that would work in the doctrine side operationally.
So I can say that the Western world finally wake up, understanding the conflict that we have seen in the last few decades from Asia, Pakistan and India, and from Europe. We saw Ukraine and Russia conflict, and we saw in our region our conflict here in Israel, and of course the Houthis against Saudi Arabia. So wherever you take it in the last decade, you see the conflict and the importance of air defense in that manner. As Gidi mentioned, the open architecture, so I think the interoperability, the connectivity of system to work together and for alliance to cooperate regarding those threats are essential pillar these days. And when I'm talking about interoperability, it's not about only the connectivity between systems. It's also training together. It's also tactical procedure. It's also doctrine. It's a mutual respect to your alliance and their mistakes sometimes. And you have to do it on a regular basis. As you can see in our region, our famous exercise with the US troops, what called the Juniper Cobra, that was trained several years in a row, and brought us, I think, to the success that we saw in the final conflict between Israel and Iran, when Israeli and American work together, shoulder to shoulder, with a different system, but with the full connectivity, interoperability, show a great capability regarding air defense. So as you see in our region, let's say that necessity is mother of all invention. We needed to develop our own system, our famous system, Iron Dome, the David Sling, the Arrow 2 and 3, and created our own umbrella and our own dome regarding defense. And I think maybe the close relationship between the Israeli defense forces to the Israeli industries, and the fact that most of us are active reserve in the service and understand the need, and of course that we provide system to protect our homeland and our family, not only in the sake of marketing and things like that, that ensure the customer that we are bringing the best system into the arena.
I want to key up something and jump in here. And Shachar, I think we want to maybe elaborate, because I think it is very important to connect two things. One is the fact that the new laser system, we talked about it in a different podcast, the Iron Beam, and how that technology evolved. But since this is now actually in these days is now in the process of being delivered to the IDF, You mentioned earlier that there was a very strong need to be very economical in how we intercept. And naturally, we understand that the laser is not just adding capabilities, but it's also an opportunity to save interceptors. So can you talk about that, and maybe also how the long-range precision strike, when it comes to that big conflict, the long-range protection, defense against these long-range missiles, how does that work together?
Thank you, Gidi. That's a great point. I used to call it the dialogue between offense and defense. So while the defense should one of the key element is to protect the strategic site, and that include the Air Force base and strategic infrastructure of the State of Israel that keeps the continuation of the capability to attack. So that's what the defense donate to the offense. While the offense, the precision strike, as Gidi mentioned, is helping the defense to deal with the mass salvo by attacking, preventing attack of the systems, the air defense system, the stockpile that the enemy have, and reduce the threat that the defense need to deal with in the final stage. So I think that dialogue was demonstrated very well between the conflict of Iran and Israel in the last year. And one of the reasons that we have done, deal with that in the way that we have done, and I think that was good, was the Israeli Air Force capability to create air superiority and even air supremacy.
I would say it's more than air supremacy. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Air supremacy in the sky of Iran, and of course the capability of the combined air defense of the Israel and US here, boots on the ground in Israel, I think create that type of success defending the population area of Israel and of course the strategic infrastructure.
That's a really great insight. And I guess before we wrap up, I wanted to sort of take a look to the future. Yeah, Brigadier General Shahatz, you mentioned during our preparation the fact that, innovation itself kind of needs to change and countries need to think a little bit around procurement. And we spoke about the US, how it's sort of shifting how it approaches acquisition and readiness. I mean, I guess, are there any other sort of thoughts that stand out in that space?
I think nations, they have to adapt other combat-proven solution, even if they did not invent it in their home area. I think company should collaborate and bring capability to the armed forces quickly than the time that it's take today. It's too long today to do the long process and provide the system while the threat is already here. And I think that Israel and the region is a kind of a microcosmos to the entire world, and especially to other continent and communities. What you see here today will be nearby you tomorrow. So you better get ready.
Absolutely. I would say that, some nations claim that they don't have these threats, that they may not need the stockpiles that some people are talking about, that they may not need to be able to defend against this variety of instantaneous threats from long to medium to short range, etc. And I say, why? Why would a nation that could be under threat think that these kind of threats would not be aimed against them if there's a conflict going on? I think no one enemy would prevent themselves from using this because they see it's effective. So I think in general, when you think about how that matters in terms of application, I think that the fact that nations need to build their stockpiles, to build their infrastructures and the multi-layered defenses of their choice, there's a shift in the industry as well, Tony, that I think is a trend, has become a trend. While in the past, nations tended to just work on their own and develop their own capabilities, partnerships now become not just a need for localization and transfer of technologies because there's a demand on one side to the other, but also it's a need because they need to build their stockpiles. So when there is a partnership, it's not only to transfer technology and make the technology sovereign in whoever is applying that, but it's the ability to build together 2 or 3 and sometimes more nations production lines and supply chains that could support buildup of production of these interceptors and systems. And just one example that I think is very relevant is the fact that we're looking at the Iron Dome, and the second one is the Spider system. We're doing that together with other nations, but also how we work with European nations and the U.S. With a big focus on the U.S. for the laser system. It's brand new technology. It's breakthroughs in application and technologies that make this possible, these iron beam systems. But of course, lasers, everybody wants to do lasers, and working together, making this possible is a key element in localization. I think it's an opportunity and not an impediment.
Yeah, that's a great reflection. This is one of those conversations where this could continue for a very long time, but I do have to start wrapping things up. So I'd like to ask each of you, if there's only one thing that you want defense leaders or decision makers to take away from this conversation, what would that be? And I'll try and ask you to keep it to sort of 50 words or fewer, if possible.
I'll start on the easy side. I think number 1, stockpiles and multi-layered defense. Number 2 is you need to have things that are affordable and that do not take time to deliver. So the availability and the affordability are key. And then the last piece is the partnerships. And that is, I think, is really the key, because without the partnerships, without technology transfer programs and the sovereignty that nations could hope for, the resilience is not going to be created. So I think a lot of people are paying attention to that, to create that resilience through partnerships.
I'll try to be short and simple. I would like to say that RAFAEL is not only about system, it's also about people. And I think the know-how and the experience that we have in RAFAEL and that we are ready to share with our customer around the globe is priceless. So you are most welcome.
Great ending. I agree.
So that's all for this episode of Design for Advantage with RAFAEL. We've unpacked how air defense is adapting to an age of saturation, speed, and uncertainty, and why layered, tailored, and cooperative approaches are the future. My thanks to Brigadier General Shohar Shohatz and Gideon Device for joining us. Gents, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you all.
If you missed our earlier episodes on topics from precision strike to survivability, you can find them all at the Design for Advantage content hub at shephardmedia.com. We'll drop a link in the show notes. Until next time, thanks for listening.